I think Roger really did a stellar job of talking about the lab and a lot about the virus, and I'll kind of skip some of the virus stuff. But so I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the virus in our herds. And right now, I think the best effort that you guys can do is to try to keep it out. And so we'll talk a little bit. I know biosecurity is not a very interesting subject, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And then I'll try to end this thing with some of the strategies that are going on around the country to try to get the virus out of herds as far as elimination from individual herds if you do get it. And there's a number of veterinarians in this room that are really on the firing line that I see out there. So I may ask them to come up here and help Roger and I in the end. So Dr. Yeske is, in fact, I'm pretty sure Dr. Yeske is person that coined the phrase TGE on steroids. He was the first person that I heard mention that. So, this, if you've had it, this is what it looks like. Dehydrated pigs, high mortality, less than 2 weeks of age after the farms break. Pretty significant mortality for another 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks after that, and then things start to get better. So, typical of TGE. Most of the younger veterinarians and younger producers really don't remember the TGE that I remember in the 70s. And when I was a young veterinarian, believe it or not, TGE had steroids in those days too. And we saw very similar mortality, very similar number of farms that became endemic. Most of those farms in those days were not multi-site farms, so everything was on site. So many times we got endemic TGE. Something happened around the early mid-'80s. We got this respiratory coronavirus, which was, at the time, we didn't call them transboundary disease, but it was a transboundary disease that we think came from Europe. And that spread rapidly across the United States. There was two good things about that virus. One, it didn't cause much disease. We didn't even know the pigs caught it when they did catch it. And the other thing is it looks like it cross-protected against TGE because in reality it was a TGE virus that had somehow genetically mutated from a gut virus to a lung virus. And so it pretty much put TGE out of business. Although we still see TGE, we don't see the PED-like variety from the past. But so I think Roger had these same two photographs that someone, Dr. Holtkamp gave these to me, but this pretty typical of viral diarrhea in these pigs. Roger covered all this, and I'll skip on. It is spread by fecal oral primarily. There's been a lot of interest. Some of the veterinarians, especially down in the very windy areas of the country, Kansas, Oklahoma, have suggested this might be an airborne virus. And there's only been one study that I know of to date, and that was done at Kansas State University, and they were not able to spread this virus by aerosols. Of course, in the early days of PRRS, we said the same thing. We couldn't spread it by aerosols, but now today we think that the virus can be spread by aerosols. And this one, anything can happen in a tornado, a thunderstorm, or when you live 150 yards or 500 yards from a large finishing site, things just happen. So the incubation on this thing is extremely short. We think 12 to 36 hours after the pigs pick up the virus, they start showing clinical signs. Sows vomit, develop diarrhea. Finishing pigs don't seem to get that sick, but pregnant sows is a different matter. And I think, Roger, you mentioned that those sows that are sick about the time they're being bred, we've seen pretty dismal farrowing rates out of those groups. But finishing pigs, you may not notice it unless you're observing your pigs the way you should. And it's fast. It moves through a barn very quickly. And about 7 days later, the pigs are back to normal. And many times they don't go off feed much while they have this virus, depending on their size. If they're just placed out of the nursery, more clinical signs than if it's towards the end of the finishing phase. So The good news is the virus only infects pigs, so we haven't, unlike influenza, we haven't had all the special interest groups throwing bricks at us and getting on the news about how unhealthy pork might be this time, but it's only a pig disease. Elimination, I'll talk more about that at the end, but it is similar to TGE, what we used to do in the 70s and 80s when we eliminated this virus, TGE virus. Its first cousin from farms. We use the same protocol. It takes longer, like Roger said. 90 days is probably, I know some farms that the veterinarians have told me they got it done in 90 days. Others are saying it more like 100, 120 days, if at all. And so there is that group of farms that our elimination process doesn't seem to work. And the bad news is, if you are a single site farm and you've got nurseries and finishing pigs on site, these type farms usually become endemic. The virus is going to continue to circulate primarily in nursery pigs, mid-nursery on, and it will be very costly in those situations. You'll see a significant loss of growth potential and feed conversion in those pigs in that endemic situation in nurseries. So there is a Harris vaccine does have a vaccine on the market. It's their second go at this. They do have some data that shows that it will develop neutralizing antibodies. I haven't seen it in use in the field. I know that a couple of other companies are really close to having, I think Zoetis has got a modified live vaccine in the cooker that's coming, and there'll probably be other vaccines. So, when the vaccines come out, we're going to have to learn how to use them. And right now, we don't have any advice on how you may or may not use those vaccines. But killed vaccines usually work well as boosters, and so we're probably going to see that in herds that are already infected, boosters, modified live usually as primary immune stimulant, and so we may vaccinate naive herds there. I don't know yet, but we'll see. The practitioners in the audience will probably tell me in the next few months whether that works or not. So Roger mentioned the differential diagnosis, and there are some diseases that look like this, look like PED, especially in the early stages. So if you're, and we're pretty nervous about this thing now, but there are some other agents out there. So I think I want to make sure I say, get your samples to the lab and find out. Just don't assume that this is PED, especially the rotaviruses look a lot like this virus, and sometimes somehow we do have herds that are naive, haven't seen rotavirus before, and then they get a rotavirus in. It'll look a lot like TGE or PED, and so do your diagnostics, get your veterinarian, work with your veterinarian, and get the diagnostics done. So what does it mean on the farm? What does it mean to you guys about the biosecurity, and what does fecal oral mean for a producer? Well, what Roger said is that anything that can get even microscopic amounts of fecal material stuck to it, metal, cut boards, our clothes, our boots, our shoes, our hands, anything that we can get small, tiny, unseen amounts of pig feces that has the virus in it on ourselves, we can track this virus around. And so there's no question that our trucks are tracking it long distance around the country. But then in communities, it looks like we're doing a pretty good job of tracking it ourselves. And cross traffic, our commercial manure haulers, we've tried to spend some time working with them and training them biosecurity. Those guys are in a huge hurry, and I'll talk a little more about them. But feed trucks and feed drivers, there's a lot of veterinarians out there right now that suspect that we may be tracking this virus around some with our feed trucks. I think the drivers are probably more risk than the truck and the feed, but so you don't want to let the drivers come into your farm and leave the ticket. Farm that I have a financial stake in Kentucky, we just put a mailbox out at the end of the drive, and so the driver just leaves the invoice in the mailbox, and we don't let him even come in the door of our office. So always consider people that visit your farm. There's Just this week, University of Minnesota has done a survey comparing farms in different parts of the country that have gotten PED virus versus those that didn't in the same areas. And one thing that becomes apparent in that survey is that the farms that are broke have had significantly more visitors, have significantly more truck traffic, significantly more turnover in their employees and things like that. So that tells me that we're still doing, as people, we're doing a pretty good job of dragging this virus around ourselves. It's not just the trucks and it's not just China. And we don't have any indication that we've gotten more viruses in from Asia after that initial set of viruses that infected the first 5 farms. But so hands, shoes, employees, everything has to be considered. I mentioned the manure handlers. We've done significant amount of biosecurity training. That's ongoing right now with these manure handlers. We've done videos. We've trained the Iowa Extension swine specialists around the state of Iowa have been trained and they have our slides and are giving these same presentation to manure haulers. Your water supply is possible. This virus likes cold, wet conditions. You know, we know TGE could survive in pits for 6 to 8 weeks sometimes. I had experience in a farm years ago where we depopped the farm. It was a finishing site. It was a boar development for a breeding stock company site. And we depopped it, took the pigs out, left it empty for 30 days. We couldn't wash the pits. It had deep pits, partially slatted floors. We got the water down as low as we could. We cleaned up that barn as well as we could. We fumigated it with formaldehyde, had gas in those days. Brought boars back in. 5 weeks later, water line broke and the pit filled up and the barn was at a slope and the last 2 pins in the barn down at the bottom of the slope, the water got over the slats. 4 days later, we had TG again in those pins. So the virus in the real world probably lives longer than what it says in the book. And I don't think PED will be much different. And we predicted that we would have a lot more cases come winter. Just like TGE, this virus likes cold conditions. It can survive in the environment out of the pig for much longer periods of time, the way the weather is today. The virus, like TGE, can be frozen a few times before it's inactivated. If it freezes and thaws 2 or 3 times, it will inactivate the virus. But that one frozen and then pigs get on the truck, things melt, then you've got an exposure. So just this slide, I tried to demonstrate, different things. Anything that comes into your farm or goes out of your farm is a risk. And when we think of biosecurity on the farm, we kind of consider it like a hazard analysis critical control point. And so the idea is to identify everything that comes to the farm, try to identify if it's a risk or not, and then identify if you can do something about it. And the critical control points are the ones you can do something about. Well, if you look at this, most of these things we can do something about. We can't do anything about weather or, the aerosols and weather, but we certainly can do something about transportation, our feed, our replacements, all these things we can do something. And so that's what a biosecurity system is. And so when I talk about biosecurity, most of you guys are thinking, how do we keep something out? Really, biosecurity is bioexclusion, which is keeping things out. And then biocontainment is really important. If we do get it, how do we keep from spreading it to our other sites or our neighbors? And then, of course, biomanagement would be things like, can we vaccinate and reduce the impact? And so that's the 3 components of biosecurity. But right now, we're mostly talking about, bioexclusion. And so from the Minnesota study, we know we need to limit traffic. We need to make sure anything that comes into the farm, equipment, supplies, that we can clean it and disinfect it. And I'll talk a little bit about disinfection in a minute, but we need to enforce downtimes. Again, this virus can live at room temperature for, looks like, 6 to 7 days. So a lot of downtime is not necessarily going to help you. What really is going to help you is make sure anybody that comes to your farm comes in a clean vehicle, in clean clothes, and goes through your shower like, if you have a shower facility. Manure haulers, I talked about them. So disinfectants, this is an envelope virus, and most disinfectants will inactivate it if given enough time. If you look at these four kind of our traditional vaccines, the Synergize guys have just recently published on PED virus, and we thought that this disinfectant would work fine. Well, they proved that it does. It's highly effective. DCNR is a similar one. Instead of glutaraldehyde, it has formaldehyde. Probably works well, but no claim. The Virkon S has a coronavirus claim, but it's TGE, not PED. And then Tektrol, I believe Tektrol will work fine too, if given enough contact time. And so how do we use disinfectants in the winter? We probably need to be using antifreeze. Propylene glycol works well with especially Synergize, and they've published data on how to mix that. You can go online or send me an email, and I'll send you the information if you need it. So as producers, this biosecurity mystery that we all talk about and wonder about is really about establishing clean, dirty barriers, or using that clean, dirty concept. Is the end of the load out, load in, is that the clean, dirty barrier? And if it is, if you establish that as a barrier, then the driver of the truck should not cross that barrier. If you're loading out cull sows, that cull sow goes on that truck. You don't want to let that cull sow come back and cross that barrier. If it's the beginning of your load out, you may want to wash and disinfect that load out before you return to your farm, inside your farm, and you may just do that once you've loaded and then go out and come back around and shower in rather than to go right back into the farm. Because if that truck that you just loaded had this minute amount of contaminated feces on it and you get it on you, there's a good chance, as infectious as this virus is, if, when your course of doing your daily chores, you're going to give it to a pig somewhere in that barn. And so that's how easy it is to carry this thing around. Service personnel, when I was at Premium Standard, we had a service guy that refused to shower in, and we finally figured it out, and he was spreading PRRS pretty well, but not showering in. He had the farm manager's buffaloed. He was kind of big, gruff, and didn't want to shower. But I can tell you, if you got showers, you make sure everybody uses them. And also a logbook. I think everybody that comes into your farm should sign a logbook and document where they were last with pigs. And if you do that, at least it makes them think, am I putting this customer at risk? So, and then those of you that haul your own pigs to slaughter or to the buying station, Roger mentioned the studies that were done at the buying stations and at the Midwest slaughter plants. And I think they swabbed like 667 slaughter trucks, and this was in August, before this thing really took off. And in August, about 18%, as I recall, those trucks were positive before they unloaded their pigs. And then an additional 11% were positive when they left, so a total of about a third, 30% of the trucks were positive when they left the slaughter plants here in the Midwest. So that tells us, how easy it is to track. But if you're hauling your own pigs to slaughter, you need to think about what you're going to do with your trailer and your truck when you come back to the farm, and are you going to wash it and disinfect it? And if you are, I wouldn't do it next to my barn. Get the aerosol, spray in with your pressure washer, gets that in the air, and it will be an aerosol virus if you do that. It will go 20, 30 feet in an Iowa wind into a barn. So think about that. Set up protocols with your employees. If they're in charge of hauling those pigs to slaughter, what are you going to do? Where are you going to wash that truck? Are you going to disinfect it? And then what's that employee going to do? If it's you and you don't have a shower at your sow farm, go back to the house, take a shower, clean clothes, clean boots. Don't wear those things back in. to the farm, especially shoes, for at least a week after you've cleaned and washed them and done a little disinfecting. Now, clothes, I think if you run them through the laundry, a little chlorine bleach in with the detergent, wash those clothes, run them through a dryer, you're going to be good with that. So, but it can be practical. This is just a little boot exchange thing. We don't have any experience with these with PED, but it makes a lot of sense. And this is simply a little building with a bench across it, and your employees come in, they sit on that bench, they hang their coat and their hat up on the peg on this side. They leave their dirty boots on this side. They just spin around and then put farm boots on the other side and then come into the farm. And this is really a good deterrent. We've looked at these things with PRRS virus. One of our Canadian friends that hauls a lot of PRRS negative pigs down here, when they instituted this on their finishing site, they reduced the number of their finishing barns that went positive from PRRS from 80% down to around 40%. So significant just with PRRS, and PRRS is not a fecal oral virus. It's probably harder to spread than this virus. So these things are a good way to keep things out, especially if you don't have a shower. Dead stock. I had a investigation a few years ago where we looked at a PRRS break in a sow farm, and they shared. They had a large compost site that was halfway between their 4,000 sow farm, and a mile or so away, not quite a mile, they had a gilt developer where they were bringing PRRS negative gilts in, and the sow farm was negative. Well, they had a break on the sow farm, and they shared the tractor and the compost site, and it took them only a week to drag it about a mile, probably with employees and the tractor and whatever, just by sharing a compost site. So be careful with your disposal. If you've got trucks coming to the farm to pick up dead, I think you should shuttle your dead off site, or at least away where they pick them up and not at the back door of the barn. Those trucks leak a lot when they pick up dead animals, and so there's probably a lot of PED virus where they travel, and so get that away from your site. And then if you're bringing in breeding stock, we've got the testing now. If you keep them in isolation, you can do the antibody test or maybe even the rope test to make sure those animals are negative before you bring them into your farm. If your farm is negative. And of course, I believe in showers. Showers are a good deterrent for most fecal oral diseases, and it protects you, and then showering out protects, your neighbors when you go to Casey's and tramp over the same places. If you've got your dirty farm boots on, there's a good chance you're going to leave some PED, and you've had PED, there's a good chance you're going to leave it everywhere you go. Floorboard of your truck, Casey's, or any other. I'm not picking on Casey's because somebody's probably got stock in Casey's. In fact, I do. But come and go. Any of these places where farmers and pig producers congregate for lunch, there's a risk there. So think about these things. Washing your hand and wearing coveralls, farm coveralls, and farm boots when you go into finishing sites, rather than your street clothes and the shoes that have been in the floorboard of your car or your truck, is a good deterrent. You can, those breaks are important. But think about that clean, dirty concept. Where's your clean, dirty line? Is it when you open the door of your truck to get out? That's where it should be. Same way with drivers that are loading pigs. When do they put on their boots and clean coveralls or booties, and how do they handle that at the slaughter plant when they unload is also important to keep from contaminating the whole process of transport. But keep your visitors out. If you don't have showers, I think disposable, Tyvek, booties, anyone that visits should don this type of clothing, clean, new Tyvek, and before they get back in their car, they can take this stuff off, tie it in a garbage bag, seal it, throw it in the trunk, and then dispose of it later, or dispose of it on the farm. If the farm is got a place, a disposal at the at the parking lot, and they should have one if you have visitors come to a non-shower facility. So, and I think I've talked about all this. If you have commercial feed delivered, I think you should ask your feed company, do they have a biosecurity plan? What are they doing with their vehicle? Have they trained their drivers? Ideally, they should have a planned delivery route. If they know where PED is, it'd be nice if they would deliver there last. And certainly in a commercial setting, the large companies, they figure all this out. If they know where they have a disease, they route their trucks, they route their slaughter trucks, their pig pickup trucks, nursery to finisher, weaned pigs. They'll route these to their uninfected farms first, and the same with their feed trucks. So we can take a lesson from them. And I mentioned the mailbox, and this is a farm. This is a farm in Kentucky, and you can see that's a pretty good fence, Roger, but keeps most truck drivers out. But having your bins where the drivers can open the lids and deliver that away from the pigs in the barn is wise. And this farm, particular farm, has been PRRS negative for 18 years. And it's in the middle of nowhere, of course, too. And I mentioned this, your feed drivers. And this is kind of a dangerous situation. You can see you've got the commercial hauler there with his tank. Here's the feed truck. The office doors over here. Both these trucks have crossed paths. The drivers of each have gotten out and talked to each other and shook hands. And now they're on their way when they get done. And so you can imagine a tiny drop of fecal contaminated with PED virus. If this is a positive farm, it's going to leave with both those people in their vehicle and their truck, and their equipment when they exit this farm. So little things count. This farm is a farm that has a double entrance. The commercial manure haulers, the feed trucks all use this entrance, and all the farm employees come in and out over here through this entrance, and so that avoids that crossover. The virus can't fly. It has to have help. It has to have us or trucks or, the cutting boards. It can't fly over there, so keeping it as separate as possible is wise. So, and just a little, talking about transport, of course, we've known for years that transport has been important in spreading almost all of our pig diseases. So, and transport, I think, next to the infected pig is the main way many of these viruses, including PRRS, is spread, especially PED now. So, I'm going to skip the driver, but here's a quick summary. If you're washing your own trailer, you have to hold whoever is doing that job has to be held accountable, and that means you have to inspect what they do, or you can't hold them accountable. So the bedding and all visible organic matter has to be removed first. We know recycled flush water is dangerous, and so if you're going through a commercial truck wash, find one that uses fresh water. You're less likely to carry something back home. Hot water and detergent is a necessity when you clean these things, because bacteria and viruses and organic matter form these biofilms, and once a biofilm is formed, that protects viruses and bacteria from disinfection. And so if you don't get these trailers properly cleaned, the virus will still be there. And so inspect and then rewash if it isn't clean enough. Our transport trailer companies that build these transport trailers have done a good job in the last few years of building more better biosecurity designed trailers. Complete wells, no hollow tubing, no place for viruses and bacteria to hide. And so if you're looking in the market for a new trailer, make sure that you're buying a biosecure one you can clean. And again, the heating, we know that the 160 degrees for 10 minutes will inactivate TGE, it'll inactivate PED, it'll inactivate PRRS, and it'll inactivate Salmonella and E. coli. And so if you are running a bio dryer or trailer baker, you need to kick that temperature up from your 130 or 140. That we know that won't do the job. It needs to be at least 150 for 10 minutes if you're going to get PED off your trailers. So. And that's just AEP BioDry. You guys have seen those. Inspect the trucks. When I was at Premium Standard, after a truck came through our truck wash system, and then after left the trailer baker that we had built there, we put this tag on it after we had inspected it. And so if a truck showed up at a farm, didn't have that tag on it, the farm people were instructed to send it back to the truck wash. And it worked pretty good to keep from spreading PRRS for us for a time. So things like that can be made to work. But I think the key thing about biosecurity is, just like I said, it's that hazard analysis and risk assessment and critical control points. And so you figure out where your hazards are, figure out if you can do something about it, and then do something about those critical control points. So that's the key to biosecurity. And if any of you have questions, feel free to call me or email me, and I'll answer your question as best I can. So just to quickly about elimination, because I know if you get the virus, what do you do? And the veterinarians, this is a little different from the old TGE thing, but a number of veterinarians have discovered that if they wean as many pigs as they can, if they have an off-site place for these pigs, when they see clinical signs and figure out it's PED, then they're weaning as many pigs as they can, all the way back, some down to 6 days of age. And 8 days, 6 days, whatever your facility can handle or you can manage in that situation. And then take your lumps. And it looks like that will reduce clinical signs in those farms of maybe a couple of weeks. It'll actually save 2, maybe even 3 weeks of pigs, just that one procedure. And then the next step is to, if you're going to bring in gilts, to expose them. If you can add gilts to your farm, add them immediately. Stuff them in and then close the farm to any introductions, and then do your feedback. In the old TGE days, when we really had TGE on steroids, we only fed back for about a week, maybe 10 days. And we did a real exposure. We did not try to identify that every animal got sick. We assumed the virus was infectious and contagious enough we didn't have to worry about that as long as we spread it everywhere. And so that's what we did. We would take the pigs. I like the old bucket and sponge method where you just take the sponge, bucket of room temperature water, and you just go in the farrowing rooms where these pigs are scouring like crazy, and you just soak it up and in your bucket, soak it up in your bucket. And when you can't see the bottom of the bucket, then we'd take it out in the barns, and we would take a coffee cup size, 6 ounces, and put that on the feed in front of every sow down the row until we exposed to everybody. We got great results with that approach. So I said, get the gilts in if you can. If not, you're going to do without gilts for 90 days, replacements for maybe 100 days. And then the first ones you bring in will be negative, and then you have something to test to see if the virus is gone. We used to bring in 30 gilts in a farm of 250, 500 sows. We'd bring 30 gilts in as sentinels. Another approach is to bring in some boars and a few boars, and then let them run the alleyways to expose themselves to everything. And that's probably a little less risk unless you're buying high-priced boars. But the sentinel animals are far more sensitive to detecting that virus if it's still in your farm compared to all the testing that Roger can do. So it's just a really good way to figure out if you got rid of the virus. And so here's, I think Joe Connor and Jared Geiger put this together, but cold water, the virus is sensitive to hot water, so if you're going to do the feedback, room temperature water is important, especially not hot water. And I mentioned vaccine, the Harris vaccine's on the market, and Hank tells me that Dr. Harris tells me that their new vaccine looks like it's more effective than the first one. Zoetis has got one in the works. MJ Biologics, I know, has got one in the works, modified live-like. There's many of these vaccines in Asia, and most of them haven't been very successful in Asia. How we use these vaccines and what this tool turns into, I don't know. Dr. Holtkamp, I'll part with this one, but Dr. Holtkamp reminded me that those of you that keep this virus out, there's a pretty big carrot at the end of the rainbow here. Using his calculations, if we have a reduction in our national herd, our slaughter herds supply by 7.7%, with his calculations, that equates to $16.42%. 42 cents added value to the pigs next fall. So I don't know how, he's an economist on the side. A veterinary economist is probably just as dangerous as any economist, but it does look like that it's going to affect the market. And there's a lot of speculation about how many pigs have we lost, and I've heard numbers from 1 to 5 million, and I would say we're probably pushing towards the 5 side of that, 3, maybe 4 by the end of this winter. And some of the veterinarians in the room that are traveling around a lot of farms could probably confirm that. So